Now, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari says he was deeply disappointed after the election due today was postponed just 5 hours before the polls were due to open. He has urged Nigerians to refrain from civil disorder and remain peaceful, patriotic and united. The Nigerian Electoral Commission said it was no longer feasible to hold free and fair elections due to logistical problems. While the vote will now be held next weekend, the delay still threw the country into renewed political uncertainty. While Electoral Commission officials and Western diplomats pointed the inability to transport ballot papers and results sheets to some parts of the country, 84 million voters have registered to vote. Now, Buhari, in power since 2015, faces a tight election contest against the People's Democratic Party's Atiku Abubakar. Atiku and Buhari both sought to avert violent protests or confrontation. Past elections in Nigeria have been marred by violence, intimidation and ballot rigging, and the postponement raised the possibility of unrest. Now, to discuss this a bit further now, we're joined via Skype from Nigeria in Abuja. He is the Executive Director of the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. Thank you very much for joining us there, Mr. Denis Kadima. Thanks for your time. Look, obviously, it's not unusual, I guess, for an electoral commission to shift election dates. We saw this happen in the DRC recently. But does it concern you that this one was done just a few hours before the vote?
Yes, indeed, postponement, actually, even in the context of Nigeria, it happened in 2011 and also in 2015, and this time around again. Yes, it happened a few hours before the elections could start. I think that's the biggest abnormality. You know, normally it's done before because the commission must assess the situation on an ongoing basis. But such a late postponement makes think that maybe they were not on track, but that was not disclosed. So it's a surprise, yeah.
It comes as a surprise indeed, because just a few hours before those polls were due to open, we got word here in South Africa that, of course, those Nigerian elections were now postponed. So do you think this raises questions, about the state of readiness initially of Nigeria to go to the polls? Because you have elections that were due to go ahead, but just a few hours before that was to happen, you had them just postponed, and you're saying you find that very surprising.
Yeah, the commission appeared to be very ready, in all meetings that we had with them and that they had with other observers. At no time they gave us the impression that they were facing challenges. So it's only a few hours before, the start of the election that now they announced it. So it means simply maybe they didn't disclose their problems, and then they had to do it ultimately.
Now, have you in the past couple of hours raised these concerns with INEC regarding what has now happened, and have you got any response? Because you're now saying, of course, all these challenges that have now seemed to have come to the fore were not disclosed by the Electoral Commission.
Yes, we met them. We met them at 1 o'clock, more or less, Abuja time. They've explained that they had the issue with the distribution of material, and they needed only 24 hours. However, if they distributed, if the election had to take place 24 hours later, they still have to reconfigure what they call the card reader, the smart card readers, which on its own requires about 5 days. That's why they had to postpone the whole process.
Now, that's
the explanation.
Denis, what word are you getting from your observers regarding the situation on the ground? We know that in the past few weeks, INEC officers had been set alight and thousands of electronic smart card readers and voters' cards were destroyed.
Yes, but that distraction apparently didn't affect the process because they were replaced. However, the challenge seems to be the distribution of some of the sensitive material, so they had to postpone. They needed only, as I said, 24 hours, but because of the use of the smart card readers, which can only be used on the voting day. So they have to go back to the field, collect all the smart card readers, and get them reconfigured. That's why they needed 5 more days.
Yeah. Let's get a sense from you. What is the situation on the ground? Are you concerned at all at this stage that the postponement could fuel further violence in some parts of the country?
It doesn't seem so. It doesn't seem so because, as I said earlier, it's not the first time that elections are postponed. Of course, people, particularly political parties, are very, very unhappy. But at the same time, 1 week is not too much.
1 week is quite a long time, Denis, because obviously there had been some concerns that were raised by, amongst others, the opposition about the credibility under which the elections in Nigeria would be conducted. So is there no sense from you as observers in that country that the longer this election takes to come, then it would cause a lot of uncertainty and perhaps a fuel violence in the country?
No, our people on the ground, those who have been deployed in the countryside, don't share that view. They of course confirm that there is a lot of disappointment. Parties have already spent by deploying their witnesses or their party agents throughout the country.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it doesn't appear that the anger is to the extent of, leading to violence.
All right. Now, postponing the elections to a week from now, would this not affect the credibility of the vote? I did mention just a few moments ago there were already claims from the opposition that, ghost voters were on the voters' roll. So would this raise questions about the credibility of this election should it go ahead in a week's time?
I think the only the main negative thing that it will cause is, doubts about the capacity of the Electoral Commission. But as far as the integrity of the process is concerned, I think if everyone is affected equally, apart from the expenses that some can afford, others can't. But at this stage, what they are trying to do doesn't necessarily give an advantage to one party against the others.
All right. I mean, in obviously a week's time, these elections are scheduled to go ahead. Could you paint a picture for us of the situation on the ground at the moment? Here in South Africa, we're obviously able to monitor social networking sites, for example, where some Nigerians have raised concerns about what is taking place back home. If you could paint a picture for us of the general sense. I know that you say there's a sense of calm at this stage. There's no indication that violence could flare, but we have had situations where in the run-up to the election that was due to take place today, there had been some unrest. Yes,
there were some destruction of material in the past, but this time around, our teams on the ground have not heard anything of that nature. But people are very vocal. They are very unhappy about the delay. But so far, they've been calm. They've been protesting verbally. It has not led to any kind of violence, at least where we have our teams as the ISA observer mission.
So are you confident that if an election does go ahead in Nigeria next week, that it would be conducted, according to your assessment currently, it would be conducted in a fair manner?
That will be too premature for me to say that, because we are still on the ground to observe. As you said, 1 week is a lot. We don't know what will happen. So we are on the ground monitoring the situation very closely. I can only answer that question afterward. I can't give them a blank check. So we will see until then, and then we'll come up with our statement or our preliminary declaration about the electoral process.
And I'm sure you'll be monitoring that together with your teams there on the ground. That was the Executive Director of the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, Denis Kadima, who's joining us via Skype from Abuja, Nigeria. Of course, following that announcement today of the postponement of the elections in that country.